For most people, Sun Tzu is a name associated with battlefields, generals, and strategy memes shared by entrepreneurs who have never actually read him. He is treated as the philosopher of victory, a mystical thinker who supposedly unlocked the psychology of conflict. But this narrative completely misses the real point, because once you strip away the slogans and the myth-making, you encounter something far more interesting. Sun Tzu was not obsessed with winning wars. He was obsessed with avoiding them. He was not interested in glory, discipline, or domination. He was interested in cost. And in a world that was exhausting itself through constant warfare, Sun Tzu was the first to clearly articulate an uncomfortable truth. The greatest danger to a state is not the enemy in front of it. It is the bill that comes after the war. People think the art of war is about fighting. In reality, this book is about finance. Welcome to the Financial Historian, where money, power, and history intersect, and nothing is ever as simple as it looks. To understand Sun Tzu's financial genius, you must understand the world he lived in. Because his ideas did not emerge from nothing. They were shaped in a world collapsing under the weight of its own ambitions. Around the 6th to 5th centuries BCE, during the late spring and autumn period and the early Warring States era, China was a landscape of fragmented kingdoms. Each believed it could unify the world, and each drained its treasury trying to do so. War was constant. Alliances formed and collapsed. Armies grew larger with every decade. Symbolic duels fought by aristocrats in chariots gave way to massive infantry mobilizations that required food, metal, supply lines, and taxation on a scale no previous generation had imagined. States were no longer just fighting wars. They were stress-testing their economies. The moment a king sent an army into the field, he was borrowing against the future, and more often than not, that debt came due. In the West, we imagine ancient warfare as tactical and heroic. But in this period, war was above all logistical. The moment an army moved, the meter started running. Carts, grain, horses, craftsmen, armorers, cooks, blacksmiths, porters, all of them had to be fed or paid. A campaign lasting a few months could bankrupt a small state. A campaign lasting a year could bring down a large one. Yet these kingdoms were trapped in a cycle of insecurity, and so they kept fighting anyway. This was an arms race long before the modern world invented the term, and it pushed the entire political system toward its breaking point. This is the world Sun Tzu stepped into, not as a quiet philosopher, but as a strategist forced to solve an economic crisis disguised as a military one. In the West, we romanticize him as an ancient CEO whisperer. In reality, he was closer to a risk manager. He looked at the numbers, the costs, the timelines, the logistics, and he realized that the way states were conducting war was unsustainable. Victory meant nothing if the treasury collapsed. Most rulers failed to understand this. They believed the enemy's army was the greatest threat. Sun Tzu believed their own spending was. That is why the most important line in the art of war appears at the very beginning. Before deception, terrain, or morale. He says, war is a matter of vital importance to the state. Vital not as in glorious or honorable. Vital as in dangerous, destructive, and capable of destroying the very society it claims to protect. The rest of the book explains how war can be contained, controlled, and made as inexpensive as possible. His real obsession is clear: minimizing financial risk. Even his most famous ideas are economic principles in disguise. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. This is not mysticism, it is cost avoidance, achieving the outcome without burning capital. When he says that no state has ever benefited from prolonged warfare, he is not offering poetic wisdom. He is stating a literal financial truth. As campaigns drag on, the state's capacity to function erodes. This is why he emphasizes speed, efficiency, intelligence, and psychological pressure. They are cheaper than armies. Sun Tzu did not want to win wars. He wanted to prevent states from bankrupting themselves while trying to win wars. To understand how revolutionary this was, you have to look at Chinese warfare before him. For centuries, aristocratic elites fought ritualized conflicts where honor mattered more than outcomes, and economic cost barely entered the discussion. But as populations grew and weapons changed, war scaled into something unrecognizable. States standardized currency, reformed tax systems, and built bureaucracies just to sustain their armies. War became a national project and an existential financial risk. Sun Tzu saw that the old mindset had become suicidal. War could no longer be treated as a stage for noble gestures or symbolic victories. It had become a budgetary threat requiring cold, unsentimental analysis. This is what makes Sun Tzu such an anomaly in world history. While other military thinkers glorified combat, he treated war like a balance sheet. He calculated supply chains, resource depletion, and opportunity cost centuries before those terms existed. He had no patience for generals who chase glory at the expense of stability, because he understood a truth even modern leaders often forget. Every decision on the battlefield is ultimately a decision about national solvency. Misjudge it, and you don't just lose soldiers, you lose the state. When you read The Art of War through this economic lens, the book stops sounding like ancient poetry and starts sounding like a spreadsheet. Sun Tzu opens by listing the 5 fundamental factors that determine the outcome of war. Beneath the philosophical language lies a simple truth. These are cost variables: moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, method, and discipline. These are not mystical categories. They are resource management categories. He is asking, what does this war require? How stable is your state? How resilient are your people? How efficiently can you move? How disciplined is your administration? This is a modern risk assessment, and from the very first page, Sun Tzu makes one thing clear. A leader who cannot calculate cost has no business calculating strategy. That is why so much of the book is about logistics rather than heroics. He devotes an entire section to the economics of feeding an army. His logic is brutal. When an army is 20 miles from home, you lose the cost of 100 measures of grain. Distance increases cost, and prolonged distance multiplies it. He explains that transporting supplies drains the treasury faster than paying troops, that maintaining an army in the field collapses the agricultural labor base. Commanders who prolong campaigns while winning meaningless skirmishes bankrupt their states. For a military treatise, it is strangely uninterested in battle and obsessively interested in cost. He urges rulers to use the enemy's resources whenever possible, not as a tactical convenience, but as a financial necessity. He criticizes leaders who extend campaigns not because they hesitate, but because they are financially reckless. What Sun Tzu understood, modern states still forget. Logistics do not support strategy. Logistics are strategy. His approach to intelligence follows the same financial logic. Today, intelligence budgets are debated in terms of security or ethics. Sun Tzu framed them in terms of efficiency. A single spy can prevent an entire army from marching in the wrong direction. A single piece of information can save a state millions. He writes that what enables the wise ruler and the skilled general to achieve extraordinary things is foreknowledge, not courage or force. Foreknowledge is simply the ancient word for data. Sun Tzu was the first strategist to understand that misallocating information is misallocating capital. Even his emphasis on speed is economic. When he writes that speed is the essence of war, he is not calling for aggression. He is calling for cost reduction. The longer time drags on, the more money burns. Victory achieved through maneuver is cheaper than victory achieved through attrition, flexibility, psychology, deception. These are not philosophical flourishes. They are fiscal discipline. Sun Tzu's deepest financial insight runs through the entire book: opportunity cost. Every decision closes the door to a cheaper alternative. Sun Tzu is not opposed to war. He is opposed to waste, And the greatest waste in his view is fighting battles that did not need to be fought. That is why he praises victory without bloodshed, achieved through diplomacy, intimidation, misdirection, or alliances. These are not secondary strategies. They are primary ones, because they serve limited capital. He warns that rulers who enjoy warfare for its own sake will destroy their kingdoms. Behind the poetic language lies cold accounting. Treat war like a passion, and you will eventually default. History proved him right. Some states poured their wealth into prolonged sieges, drained their tax base, and became vulnerable to internal rebellion. Others used intelligence, alliances, and rapid maneuver to avoid economic collapse. Those who treated war as a financial instrument survived longer. Those who treated it as a test of honor or brute strength burned out. Sun Tzu was right not only in theory but in practice. At this point, the story leaves the ancient world and enters the modern one. Because modern states continue to make the same mistake. They enter wars without calculating the long-term economic strain, and then they watch their budgets fracture. The Soviets in Afghanistan, the United States in Vietnam, the empires of World War I. These wars were not lost because the armies were weak. They were lost because the economic model collapsed. Sun Tzu would have recognized the pattern instantly. Prolonged warfare erodes the state faster than the enemy ever could. The tools we use today, cyber warfare, sanctions, proxy wars, deterrence, all aim for maximum effect with minimal cost. All of them are Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu's greatest legacy is this: the strength of a state lies not in its army, but in its economic resilience, its ability to absorb shocks, recover, and continue functioning. He may not have recognized modern technology, but he would have recognized the math. His lesson is simple. States do not collapse because they lose wars. They collapse because they cannot finance them. The best war is the one that does not require rebuilding your economy afterward. The Art of War is not a book about aggression. It is a book about restraint, not about destruction, about stability. Sun Tzu wrote the philosophy not of a warrior, but of a steward. Power is not measured by how hard you strike, but by how much striking you can afford. History shows that when financial systems collide, the winner is not the bravest state, but the most disciplined one. History does not repeat, but it moves. The same systems, the same mistakes, return with different faces. And most people pay the price without ever understanding where it came from. If this gave you a new perspective, if it helped you read the present through the past, subscribe to the channel. Because here history is not just told, it is used to understand the world we live in. The Financial Historian, where money, power, and history intersect,